Well, clearly, the president's speech is still generating attention and reactions from sundry people. Part of a significant aspect of what the president said, from some analysis that a few people have come up with, is that something in the region of 15 to 20% of that script of the speech was addressing the youths, the interest of the youths, and what government is doing at various levels to ensure that the engagement continues. But we have a couple of gentlemen to discuss that with us. For instance, part of what he said, he said that the voices of the people have been heard, the voices of the youth have been heard, and he would do everything he can to ensure that all the promises that we have in your voices have been heard, and we'll continue to listen to you and all the key stakeholders who are committed to the unity of Nigeria to ensure that every region of this nation is safe for us all, while guaranteeing that the future is also secure for the coming generation. That's one of several things that he said about the youth. Joining us to have a conversation of this on this matter is the executive director of Yaga Africa, Samson Itodo. He joins us virtually from the UK, as well as Mr. Oke Ikechukwu, who is a leadership and governance consultant. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this morning. Let me begin with you, Mr. Dr. Ikechukwu. Most certainly, it is, well, first of all, your take on that, because so from what the president said, pretty much aping what the vice president had said previously, that we seem to have neglected the young people for too long. That speech talked about so many things, especially concerning the youth. Which of them caught your interest?
I think it's difficult for something you've heard many times to retain your interest. My question would be, what is it he said in that speech that either himself, the vice president, or some other person has not said repeatedly? There are assurances, there are statements of good intention, there are declarations of what government would want to do. And 6 years into a regime, my question would be, that component of the New Year address that has to do with youth, is that really the sort of thing that will inspire and reassure our youth? If you recall, part of that speech speaks of if you like, the government partnering with parliament in order to work out some things for the youth. I think, quite frankly, I found that section rather depressing, knowing that for the last 1 year, our universities are shut down, knowing that for the last 1 year, jobs have been lost, not entirely because of government, but knowing also that taxes have gone up. So if you look at all the platforms, all the possibilities for youth empowerment, both at the level of skill, at the level of employment, and at the level of knowledge acquisition in order to engage in the economy, nothing is working. So rather than just say, okay, look at this thing, the question would be, if we do a detailed disaggregation of that speech, do we find the content reassuring? Do we find any indications that if you pick it apart and begin to now say, let us do this, that is what we should be doing at this time? So for me, looking at that section, it was rather saddening. Yes, an acknowledgement of the challenges the youths are facing, but looking at it, can we say that it really suggests a roadmap? Like I said, contains a lot of statements of good intentions, which you've heard over and over again. And for me, as a development expert, I would consider it slightly alarming because there are no specifics on the matter, and we need specifics now. So those are my initial comments.
But Mr. Ikechukwu, just acknowledging the youth, isn't that a start? Because he's never done this before.
It is, acknowledging the youth is good, but you see, there are, for me, and I may be mistaken, quite frankly, for me, there are acknowledgements that will be difficult to sustain when you're facing a crisis. That he acknowledged the youths, I would say yes, I will agree with you that that's a start. But a start in what direction after 5, 6 years? So I would rather not celebrate episodic gains of this nature. The issue is that there's a national youth crisis. There is today, from what I gather, a 43-year-old man who is the president of NANS. Our youth really being developed. So without prejudice to the fact that indeed it's commendable that we even have this level of, this, if you like, frontal recognition, the truth of the matter is that we've gone beyond such gestures. There is a major national crisis, and a strong component of it revolves around the youth. Criminality is blossoming, not because the youth want to be criminals or because they have nothing to do. These are the worries. So that you acknowledge the youth in a collapsing environment with no employment, I will be reluctant to just celebrate that fact. The roof is coming down on us. So I'm a little too alarmed to acknowledge this gestural, oh, this is the first time. It's even good that he's acknowledged the youth has not done that before. They are dying out.
Okay. Well, Mr. Itodo, one of the things that's critical in all of this is the fact that the youth are the major population of voters in Nigeria. If that be the case, as it is, one would expect that with NSAS that the president also referenced as the youth's way of speaking out loudly and resoundingly enough for government to pay attention, one would expect that perhaps there is an enabling environment for the youth themselves to venture into politics and get into the level of making the policies that will affect their lives directly. How do you see that, first of all, in the light of what the president has said? How do you see the possibility of the youth really coming in? Do you think the enabling environment is there with what the president has said?
Well, thank you and Happy New Year to you. Unfortunately, I didn't hear what the first speaker said due to sound challenges. But if you look at the president's New Year's speech, first as a young person, if you don't know the antecedents of this administration, and his speech was laced with hope. I think the president used all the right words. He made the right statements. There are several things. That speech has about 1,789 words, and youth or young people appeared 8 times. It was mentioned 8 times. 3 times he used young people. I think 5 times he used youth. And all through this, the statements in paragraphs 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 20, and 27 was where he mentioned young people. And first, he recognized the power of the youth, either as active citizens who placed a demand on his administration to ensure police accountability for violations of human rights as well as extrajudicial killings. That it took youth and young people to organize amongst themselves and place that demand. He also talked about, the entrepreneurial spirit of young people, the power of innovation, and how young people are celebrated globally. Young Nigerians are celebrated globally, having excelled in different aspects of human life. He made a commitment that he would work with the National Assembly to ensure that their legislations that harness the potentials of young people haven't recognized that they are assets. There are a few gaps for me in his speech. And first is, whilst the president acknowledges that securing our future begins with young people and the youth innovation and energy, my concern is I don't see a strong commitment on the part of the president to work with young people. His statement is drafted in a way that suggests that he and his administration are working for young people, but there is no strong commitment that he is going to work for young people. And so within the realm of youth development, is still considering or regarding young people as beneficiaries and conscripting them to that particular segment of our society, and not looking at young people as assets and as partners. What I'd expected to hear the president say is my administration will do what? We'll work closely with young people. We would appoint more young people into boards. We would appoint more young people into executive positions. We will work with the National Assembly to ensure the electoral law is amended to reduce the cost for running for office so we can have more young people into office. And I think the president makes the mistake by thinking that just signing the Not Too Young to Run law and reducing the age is sufficient to ensure youth participation. The second point for me, yes, the president acknowledges, reforms in agriculture, reforms in the fintech sector, reforms in business process startups or entertainment. He doesn't talk about politics. And that is, if you look at one of the things that the NSAS movement did, was to raise the political consciousness of young people. And more youth parties are emerging, and a lot of young people want to run for office. I expected that the president would acknowledge this desire on the part of young people to serve their community and make a commitment that his administration will invest in leadership development, will invest in reforming all these institutions of political socialization, like NANS, like the National Youth Council, and youth organizations. I think he lost that opportunity. And for me, it still raises the question of trust and whether young people actually trust that the president will deliver on even these commitments that he has made. Yes, there are interventions. You call it the Nigerian Youth Investment Fund. There's JEEP. There are several interventions of this administration to address job creation or youth unemployment. But the fundamental question is, to what extent is this serving the marginalized young people? How are we ensuring that there's equity in the distribution of public good as it relates to young people? But it's really sad that in the Federal Executive Council today, there's no young person who is speaking for young people. Yes, you have a Minister of Youth who is doing excellently well, but that's not sufficient. You've got to bring more young people on the decision-making table. And if there was one thing I expected the president to say, is to say for 2021, 2022, and 2023, as we prepare young people for leadership, I am going to appoint X percentage of young people into office. But he didn't say that.
Well, Mr. Itodo, this opening is quite challenging. But let's take a break. There is still so much to decrypt in all of the things that the president said, and as you rightly pointed, especially from those paragraphs. If you have something to say about that as well, you're watching us from wherever, tweet at us at Sunrise TV. We're back in a moment. Just stay with us. Well, thanks for staying with us. Dr. Kechuku, let me come to you on this. Well, there are a good number of points that the president raised in that speech that he read, and it's been generating, quite some reaction from so many people. And he actually went ahead to mention some specific sectors: sport, entertainment, information and communication technology, commerce, and globally recognized as achievers, he said. Now, if you, first of all, speak to one thing, the fact that we have various categories of youth. We have those in urban centers, we have those in the rural areas. We have, you are a development expert, so you'll be able to decrypt all of this for us. In practical terms, how do you see that commitment of the president playing out, if at all it will?
Like I said earlier, it's not enough to make a statement. Let us suppose I'm a youth in the village. This is 2021. The president has made a speech that's supposed to affect my life. My question will be, what's the instrument for transmitting this designed intervention that will aid me? Like, it's good you made the disaggregation. Even within the urban area, starting from the secondary level, you have children who are in private schools. You have children who are in public schools. You have people who are in, private and public universities. Now, these are the platforms for developing the next set of leaders. How are they being managed? So what you see in all of this is that there's a disconnect between pronouncements, policy, and delivery instruments. In all of this, do you see any instrument that will deliver? Let's talk entrepreneurship. The entrepreneurs and sportsmen and women being celebrated outside the country, we must ask the question, Are they being celebrated as a product of the Nigerian state, following its institutions that prepared them, gave them the opportunity, enabled them to travel? Now they're excelling in the name of the nation? Or are some of them poached out of here because their capacity would have disappeared otherwise? Or is it that they ended up doing well, we jump out? It's like a man, you're not quite managing your house well, but your children seem to do well in the village square and you're at home celebrating it. These are the things to consider. So that, whereas it is right, we have a duty to celebrate our own. They are Nigerians, they are our youths. They are beating others in academics, in sports all over the world. That should spur us to ask a question. Why is it that they always do so well when they go out of Nigeria? So if we do not raise questions like this, we make the mistake of assuming and recording as achievement results that should actually worry us, that these children left and then they did better. Is there anything here that undermines their ability to do better? Those are the concerns. So if you then leave all those in the urban areas and now come to the less urban, what is it that government actually delivers? Fine. I'm a young man in my village or in my town. I'm a vulcanizer, or I'm a pepper grinder, or I have a salon as a young lady. How does policy drill down until it gets to me? That's a concern. So the issue you've brought out stands out clearly, and I think that's where a lot of thought should go to. Disaggregation of the categories of youth we have in Nigeria, taking it further to the point of determining. That's why you need M&E, monitor and evaluation, determining that this policy statement, exciting as it is, will actually affect the youth. Yes, there's a not too young to run bill. It's been signed into law. It would be a mistake to assume that it's actually going to impact the youth, because there's, secondly, then, the politics of office and the financial implications. Signing that bill, will it give me 50 million to pick a nomination form if I want to contest for an office in my party? It will not. Are there instruments for delivering young people of capacity who don't have 50 million, but who on the basis of their ability, we can say, no, no, no. So these are the challenges. And that's why I'm a little worried about the overall texture and tenor of the speech. When you make a presentation that states what ought to be, why it should be, but without enough attention to what you need to do to make it happen, you're likely over time to end up floating at the level of advice, at the level of brilliant laws, but without the instruments for delivering the laws. I would imagine, for instance, that the federal government should be not just concerned, but alarmed at the age of youth leaders all over the country, across all the political parties, the National Nigerian Youth Movement, National Association of Nigerian Students, that the government should be concerned that for the last 25 years, there has not been a year that none had less than 2 presidents, and that most of the time these are graduates of not less than 5 years standing, and that there are more politicians than you. So that platforms for youth recruitment have also been taken over. These are the issues, because you're talking about tomorrow. So the disaggregation will clearly show to you that, yes, here in Abuja, there in Lagos, all over, at state capitals and among the elite and people who have television, we can speak of what is being done to leverage Nigerian youths. But the truth of the matter is that the bulk of the youth, over 68 to 70% of that population, is out there, outside of this net, and that they constitute the people you see on the Ojuelegba Bridge, those who are making trouble, who come out to raid people on the road, who are, who are armed robbers. Would they be armed robbers today if they had other means of livelihood? The answer is no. So it's important that we break it down so that we don't walk away with the illusion that we are making fantastic impact. If you say a lot of young people are doing well as entrepreneurs, yeah, many are doing well, and that is a fact. They are doing well internationally, yes, but what's the population of our youth? What percentage of that population fall within the group we are celebrating? That's where the alarm will come from. So whereas it's good that we are seeing indications of excellence, the more worrying thing and what we should ask questions about is there a way we can recreate this environment such that the excellence emanates from here and doesn't always have to come out only when they go out of Nigeria? So these are the issues.
Okay. Mr. Itodo, I would like your reaction to this tweet from Armstrong Mogaji, who says they talk about the youths being in politics, but create a million barriers to stop them from going in. How much does it cost to pick a form of interest? How much does it take to pay delegates at primaries? How much to campaign? That's why only those old men can afford it. Mr. Itodo, please.
Well, I think that's a fundamental problem of our political system. And there have been attempts, to reduce the cost of politics. In the Eighth National Assembly, the National Assembly passed an electoral amendment bill that sought to limit political parties from imposing exploitative fees um, under the guise of nomination forms or sundry fees or admin fees. You recall in 2019, the president bought his form for 45 million because the APC pegged 45 million as a cost for its presidential election nomination form. The PDP for governorship pegged about 22 or 20 million thereabout for nomination forms. And it's clear that securing party nomination is exclusive for the highest bidder and the highest spender. And you can't structure your politics along that line because what you have is political leaders emerging, and their first preoccupation when they get into office is how to recoup, this amount that they spent for running for office. So that bill was passed, but the president didn't assent to it. The country is undergoing another round of electoral reforms, and what I was expecting to see in the president's speech today, the New Year's speech, was to express, or reassure us of his commitment to electoral reform, to say he will work closely with the National Assembly and sign the electoral amendment bill once it is passed, but also give some broad principles that should be contained in that bill, which is around reducing the cost for politics. So if you reduce the cost, limit parties, to certain amount of fees, as well as the criteria for running for office. Because what you've seen over the years is parties have introduced other criteria separate from the criteria pegged by the Constitution. And so if that bill is passed, the president will assent to it. But I also like to say is, yes, we may have these laws in place, but the implementation of these laws becomes a fundamental problem. And so looking towards 2021 to 2023 is how do we reset the mindset of our political class who come to politics as a do or die affair. The second point tied to the question raised is internal party democracy. And it's tied to the first point I made around the cost of politics. How are party members, involved in the decision in making in political parties? I say this, that the two major political parties, as at today, do not have an updated, accurate register of members. And so the question is, how are delegates even selected in the course of party management? So it's important that we underscore the point that if the president is really concerned about young people, he needs to also focus on political party reforms and how parties ensure that they have updated register of members, that the process of membership registration is clear, is inclusive, and then the process of delegate selection. I think that these steps within party management are very, very critical because what you have is individuals, oligarchs in political parties have hijacked party machinery and made it very, very difficult, for people with competence, character, and capacity to emerge as candidates within political parties. But I cannot conclude by saying that young people shouldn't just look at the APC or the PDP in determining platforms to seek public office. There are other political parties. As of today, there are 18 registered political parties. And I think that people can find, parties that resonate with their ideology and seek to run under the platform of those parties. But don't also focus on the political parties, but make yourself popular amongst your people. There are people who sit in State House of Assemblies today who did not have all the resources that they needed to run for office, but they are in office because they are popular amongst their people, and their people have confidence that they have the capacity and have the responsiveness required of public leaders, and so they voted them into office.
Well, Mr. Itodo, I'll stay with you for a bit. Musa Abdurrahman says on duty, on Twitter, I beg your pardon, says, we continue to blame the presidency for everything. What of the governors and local government chairmen that are much closer to us?
I don't think you are blaming the president for all the time. And if we do so, it's because he's a representative of state.
So even
he's a president of
I think the intention is to segue into conversations around the role of state governors in the politics in their states and the local governments and everything. Of course, this is something you have also spoken about quite a few times. So shouldn't we be looking in that direction as well?
I agree with you. The governors have a critical role to play, but I must also emphasize that the Constitution vests agency on the office of the president. And we've got one of the most powerful presidents in the world. So he needs to accept responsibility. It is our duty to place responsibility at his table. But the component units and the governors also have a critical role to play because they are leaders of their parties in the states. And I'd say this with all sense of responsibility. Now, across the country today, there are only a few governors who have expressed and have shown through their actions that they are committed to empowering young people and providing young people space within political offices. If you look at the governor of Ekiti State, if you look at the governor of Kaduna State, if you look at the governor of Cross River State, if you also look at the governor of Bauchi State, you see, these are governors who have created spaces for young people who sit either on the executive council or have secured secured tickets for running for office. So the governors have a role in building leadership capacities in young people and providing that access for young people. At the local government level, there is also a role that governors also have to play. And the first role they have to play is to ensure that local governments are only constituted by democratically elected individuals and not appointed individuals. Because the governors have acted in a manner that suggests that they are not interested in local governance or local government autonomy. And this is clear even after the National Assembly had passed the bill on local government autonomy. So we've got to ensure that democratic elections are conducted and the parties create that space for young people to participate, because local governments are the closest government to the people, and that's where you have majority of young people. In the FCT, for instance, you have councillors who are about 21 or 22 who currently represent their people. So we need to encourage more young people to also seek for office at the local level, but also keep their eye at the national level. Because oftentimes people say, oh, push young people to start locally and then they grow through the ranks. Yes, whilst that is important, there's nothing within our democratic books and our constitution that says that young people should only look at the local level. There's leadership deficit at the center. There's leadership deficit in our government houses in the 36 states. And so if young people who have what it takes to hold office want to aspire, the fact that we're a constitutional democracy, we ought to protect that right and give them that space and that opportunity to exercise their right, because the function of right and not a privilege.
All right, Mr. Okechukwu, beg your pardon, Dr. Okechukwu. Some have also spoken about capacity. Abdurrahman, for instance, says, I think the problem with the youth is training, education. So if you are to look at the capacity of the youth to get into these spaces that we are talking about now, do you see the capacity there? Or, as some other people have said, do you think there is a deliberate intention to keep them right there where they are? There
are youths with enough capacity for them to fill the available places. the challenge is that of mentoring and nurturing. If I'm in a position at this my age, and I only take young people who have capacity for thuggery or doing the kind of things that will not lead to development, they will be the next set of people I'll promote for leadership. So I'll be failing in that recruitment and mentoring agenda, and that's a part of the crisis on the table. So it cannot be argued as a reason because there are enough such youth and they can be sought out. But if the question is whether youth capacity is at its peak, the way it's supposed to be, no, it is not. So we can't just argue capacity as an excuse. The other thing, of course, is to also, look at the different notions of capacity we are working with. You have academic learning. Do you have the right values? Those are the questions to consider. And also, when you speak of a youth, every person who is young biologically, is he necessarily good enough for leadership in the 21st century? There are many young people who have worked with the current political leadership for probably the last 10 to 20 years. Most of them have actually imbibed the wrong values. Most of them see public office as a means of livelihood and opportunity to become a big man and be guarded by a policeman. The young councillors my colleague mentioned, is anybody doing M&E? Are we seeing what some 23-year-old people who are holding some kind of office, the way they are living, the kind of vehicles they are driving? If, as a young person, biologically young person between 18 and maybe 40, I am behaving exactly the way those we say are the cause of our problem are behaving, I don't represent a better future. But 21st century leadership requires a number of things. Knowledge, a sense of social responsibility, understanding of the human and physical geography of your country and your people, and then a commitment to sustainable policies and values. If I'm young and I have none of these, I do not represent the future. So taking it all together, what emerges then is that the prospect of youth engagement, it would be wrong to argue that the problem is capacity. It is a lie. Why do I say it's a lie? It's a lie because there are enough young people who can be picked up and mentored. They already are good enough to serve, enough in every state of the federation. Nations don't change because everybody has turned smart. It changes because a few good men and women occupy the right positions, formulate the right policies, and enforce them. So it is not correct to speak of capacity as if you like, the thing blocking the possibility for our youth. It's a lie. There are enough youth that can be engaged. But the second leg of the submission then is that very, very elaborate efforts have to be made to expand the capacities of our youth. Capacity is not just about academic education. Back in the 70s and 80s and part of the 90s, there were driving schools, there were fashion schools where people will actually go, study for a year, sometimes 18 months, get duly satisfied. There were city and guild exams that qualified plumbers and all the rest of it. All those are gone. So now, because we've progressively decapitated what will help us develop the right quality of youth to engage in the economy, employment is only being seen from government. The bulk of the population of any nation are not employed by the state. So these are things we need to reactivate, namely that young people, if you talk in entrepreneurship, it's not sufficient. The laws are not, it's not just enough to make the laws. How will they get the finances? What are the supervising organizations? Have you taken inventory of the NDE, National Directorate of Employment, and similar SMIDEN and the rest of them? One of the unfortunate, and I recall the comment about governors and youth empowerment and many other things. Part of the unfortunate outcome of some studies we've carried out is that you find that in many states of the Federation, if you take the records of youth empowerment for the last 12 years, you find that most of the names recur in the place 2 or 3 times. So it's become a recycling platform. And then also, you'll ask yourself, if you're talking about capacitation at the level of the economy, let's leave leadership now. Take, for instance, I think there's a state governor that recently distributed rabbits to encourage rabbit farming. Rabbit breeds very fast. If you produce a lot, you will sell. But you see, you do the arithmetic of economics based on environment. You're breeding rabbits in an environment where it is not a delicacy, it's not something people will ordinarily buy to eat. There's the case of a governor who empowered young people with shoe shining boxes and one who gave them wheelbarrows. You see, do not decimate your youth. That you didn't go to university doesn't mean you cannot engage competently, rise to any level in the society as we saw some elders do when we were growing up. So putting it all together and looking at the crisis on the table, my take is simple. Our youths need the kind of help that will come, not just as policy, but as reality they can touch. They need a kind of intervention that they will see that it affects their life. The reference to local government chairmen and state governors, yes. What are their roles?
Dr. Kichuku, we need to start
Part of the
winding
crisis
down. We need to start winding down now. Our time is fast spent, but I need to ask Mr. Itodo this quickly before we go. Most of our young people have grown up in Nigeria either during a military regime or after. So you talk to a lot of them and they tell you our parents stole, so we're just waiting for our time to get our fingers in the till. And Dr. Kechuku spoke about mentoring these young people. Do you think there's enough mentorship going on so that we can get them out of this mindset of being in service is all about, it's my turn? And you've only got 2 minutes to answer that question.
There's not enough mentoring going on. And I'll say mentorship both horizontally and vertically. As we look at elders who espouse the values of integrity, patriotism, hard work, these are the kinds of leaders or elders that we should emulate. But even within our own generation, if you look at the answers, most of the folks who are on the street are Gen Zs. How are the millennials also providing mentorship for Gen Zs? Because we need to think about raising, a very active citizenry, and that will come and replace us. So it's more mentorship or mentoring needs to. We need more mentorship and mentoring across board, both horizontal and vertically. But I think what's also important is our families have a critical role to play. The family is the closest and the first point of political socialization. I think parents need to invest, in training and building and inculcating in their kids, these values of patriotism. And so when they go into society, they hold on to those strong beliefs. But if we're going to be successful as a country, if we're going to be replacing this cadre of political class with a cadre that cares about the common good, then it's going to take mentorship at different levels. And even we who are also in this conversation, the fundamental question is, what are we doing with mentoring other young people who are within?
Well, clearly, Mr. Itodo, as you have often advocated, it's a very, very long conversation. It's a marathon, as you would often say. But how well we are doing in this marathon, that's another thing altogether. Are we pacing right enough? Are we fast enough? Or are we in slow-mo? I guess time will tell, but we have to thank you very much. Samson Itodo is founder of Yaga Africa, as well as Kechuku, a leadership and governance consultant. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.